Session B, unfortunately, couldn't join us in person due to the passing away of his grandmother. However, he has joined us online. Madhav Raman and Vaibhav
Recording
Dimri
in progress.
graduated from the School of Planning and Architecture, Delhi in 2001 and established Anagram Architects in 2004. Today, the practice is recognized for its commitment towards delivering deeply contextual designs that encourage sustainable lifestyles. Involved in architecture, interior design, urban design, public infrastructure planning, and environmental design, the firm practices conceptually bold design that seeks sustainability across various registers, including resource management, market forces, urban governance, traditional practices, cultural identities, evolving technology, and changing climate. Over the years, the practice has garnered much intentional acclaim, including a nomination for the Aga Khan Award 2010 and inclusion in the Wallpaper Magazine's Architects Directory 2009. Its work has been permeated at the Architectural Review's World Emerging Architecture Awards 2007, United Kingdom, the Cityscape Architectural Awards 2008, 2010, and 2016, UAE, the Wiener Berger Brick Awards 2010, Austria, and the Holcim Award for Sustainable Construction 2011, Switzerland. The Asia Pacific Design Awards 2012, United Kingdom, the Dedalo Minose International Awards 2017, 2019, and 2022, Italy. Welcome, Madhav. You are now online and we can all view you.
Thank you. I hope you can hear me. Assalamu alaikum from the other side of the border, Sarhad Par. As the person who was introducing me mentioned, I had a bereavement in my family. I would have really liked to be over there, but inshallah I'll be able to come over sometime soon. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. Do let me know if things are visible.
We can view the screen.
All right, great. I saw the brief for the program for this session, and it had to do with creative journeys. So I decided to put together some slides that reflected the way I started my practice with my partner Vaibhav, and our journey so far and what we've learned along the way. And it'll be good to compare notes at the end of the session whether things are similar in Pakistan as well. So Vaibhav and I met each other in college in 1996. We were involved in the normal curriculum of the college, but we also did a lot of theater together. In fact, we started a theater group after we graduated called Second Foundation. So we started working together in 2001. By 2004, we had set up our practice formally. And now it's been about 22 years plus of working together. As you can see, I've grown my hair out while Vaibhav is pretty much the same. While we've come together, things have changed around in the world around us, and things seem to be growing apart. So back in 1989, there were 174 countries if you looked in the atlas. By 2000, the Olympics flew 199 flags representing various countries. And by 2021, if you were to list down the number of country domains on the internet, you'd come to the figure of around 275. And what's apparent is that in the past 22 years or 25 years or so, many things have changed around the world. To begin with, we are beginning to see the end of globalization. In fact, some would say we are almost entirely post-globalized now. But the post-globalization has resulted in a situation where we are hyper-connected. So all the vestiges or the networks of globalization continue and in fact propagate. And while this is happening amongst us, the planet we're living in is changing quite drastically. And I don't need to tell you, considering how bad the floods were in Pakistan. Now that's resulted in various things internationally and globally. To begin with, the idea of diplomacy in the past 25 years has changed. It's something that I would now refer to politely as root diplomacy. And it's basically based on three types of nationalism. One is ethnic nationalism, who we are as nations and how we identify ourselves. The other is economic nationalism, that is to say that we rely more and more on adding economic value within the territorial domains of our countries. And the third and most significant is ecological nationalism, where we treat ecological assets as if they were assets of a nation. The hyper connectivity that we have witnessed has resulted not in uniformly distributed networks of information, but rather connected silos. And we see various examples of this. So the growth and propagation of gated living and what I like to refer to as public spaces that look public, but are actually secured spaces or privatized spaces. The idea that laws within a nation can vary. Economic laws, for example, in free trade zones don't adhere to necessarily to the laws of the nation. Data localization, as we get more and more onto the internet, our very identities are now located in different territorial regions and different jurisdictions. And whether we are in a Starbucks or at home or within the office, our Wi-Fi hotspots have created silos in themselves. And I guess the lesser said about WhatsApp groups and other online groups, the better. In terms of ecological breakdowns, we can see it almost in sequence. First is geospheric depletions, which means that we're pulling a lot of stuff out of the ground and we're burning it. And when we burn it, it rises up into the atmosphere, creating pollution. Because of that, there is a whole change in the water cycle around the planet, creating hydrospheric mayhem. And separate from that, but also as a result of this, we are seeing very rapid biodiversity loss. How has architecture responded to this in the past 25 years? Whether it's Venturi in the 90s, Hadid in the 2000s, or Bjark Ingels in the 2010s, architecture aspires to be more global, more high-tech, and perhaps more cool. But inevitably, architecture has always aspired to be more urban. However, urbanization is actually deruralization by exodus. People are not coming necessarily to cities to seek opportunities or in a sort of positive movement, but are really escaping extreme conditions in a rural area and moving to cities. So across the planet, we see three types of refugees. We see ethnic refugees, we see climatic refugees, and we see livelihood refugees. And these are the people who populate our cities. Now, let me focus a little bit more on India, but this, I assume, extends into the entire South Asian subcontinent. When just about the time we started working, India crossed 1 billion population. It was a landmark moment for our country. It spoke to a apparent demographic dividend, and we were 16% of the world population. In 2020, we became 1.4 billion and contributed 17% to the world population. And in 2040, we're going to be 1.52 billion and contribute 15% to the world population. Now, what that means is in a period of 40 years, we're going to be adding half the population we had in 2020, which is a huge number of people. And when one looks at this image that I have in the background, which is NASA's image of the subcontinent, and zooms in, once you zoom in, you get a sense of how these 1.4 currently and soon to be 1.52 billion people are living. So they're not living in concentrations. You can see it in the lighting pattern that it's actually a sort of blur. And that is the hypothesis that we currently use to define how we work and where we work. And that is, we refer to it as a blurbanism. It's the story of the almost cities. So if you look at this chart of how India is urbanizing and is expected to urbanize, currently we are 65% rural and 35% urban. And the fact is this gray zone in the middle is the bulk of the urbanization. So the big cities are essentially just expanding without any true kind of enhancement of life quality, rather a degradation of life quality. But because of the internet and because of cell phones, it is this band of almost cities that are very, very large villages or very small towns that are actually going to be the places where the bulk of our population is living and where where it's going to live. Now, if you were to look at a satellite image of Delhi, where I am currently, and the area around it, right up to the foothills of the Himalayas, which is the closest wilderness, as it were, to the city of Delhi, you'll see that it's almost pockmarked with settlements of various sizes. These are rural, semi-rural, semi-urban settlements, and they kind of gather around the city of Delhi. The other perspective is to look at Delhi as an expanding animal, eating up the agricultural land around it, ring fencing often very ancient settlements, rural and semi-urban settlements, by eating up the land around it into formal colonies and kettling these settlements into what are called here urban villages, and I expect they're called the same in Pakistan. These include historic settlements, these include proto-rural settlements, they include including informal settlements like jhuggis or bastis. Now, as a result, anywhere in our country, while we are urbanizing, only 25 to 30% comes under the formal city, which is governed by the master plan and is what you see in this image. This is a suburban extension of Delhi called Dwarka. But 70 to 75% of our cities in India are actually informal. Now, when we refer to them as informal, it almost appears that they are add-ons to a formal city. But actually, they pre-existed. And not only did they pre-exist, they often were lively centers of commerce, culture, and social activity. And it's actually the kettling of them by the city that is slowly suffocating these settlements. So Delhi from the sky looks something like this. It's a city that is full of holes. We often refer to it as the big cheese. But since 2000, since I started practice, it's also gained notoriety as being amongst the most polluted cities in the world. So it's better perhaps to refer to it as the big V's. So given that context, I'll start with showing you some of our projects. This is the offices for the South Asian Human Rights Documentation Center here in New Delhi. It's a very tiny plot, 50 square meters. It was also the first building we completed, and it is the building that garnered us the Aga Khan nomination, of which we are very proud. So it's our first building, and it's also our most precious building. And it's a building which lies at a border. And that's the border between the formal colony of Safdarjung Enclave and really the 700-year-old settlement of Humayunpur. Now, on both sides, both types of settlements are sort of mixed culturally. There are people from all over the country who live in, and perhaps even in Humayunpur, people come there from even abroad and live. But they are extremely different income groups. So the divide here is not so much cultural, but economic. But the dividing space is actually a road that goes past a community green or a park. And what is surprising is that even though there is a lot of dense development around, the park is pretty much abandoned, essentially as a no man's land between two settlements. So when we were asked to build on this site, we realized that the longer side of this 50 square meter plot was actually the side that faced the west and gained the maximum amount of heat. So we felt we needed to build a really thick brick wall. But something about the street that was animated every morning and evening by folks who used to leave the settlement of Humayunpur to walk to the nearest bus stop, who would pick up their daily needs and food requirements along the way, created a bustling market street. And we felt, would it be possible to respond to that architecturally? So fresh out of college, we did what we did best, which is make lots of drawings of brick courses. And we came up with a sort of masonry pattern, which in fact involved a simple stack of 6 bricks that rotated twice between 2 floors. And once we created this pattern, we realized that it was actually robust enough to start removing bricks from the middle. And we got a perforated screen that sort of reflected the animation of the street, that threw out the light in the evening from the building into an otherwise unlit street corner. It lit up the street corner with this interesting pattern, and also took in a shadow pattern of the sun onto the staircase, and in many ways marked the corner of that otherwise anonymous no man's land between two settlements. We realize that in architecture, a lot of what we do, especially when we build homes, is actually manipulate privacies. And when people build for themselves, privacy is often what defines homes much more than the program. So this is an extreme case. It's called Cleft House. It's built on the outskirts of Delhi, next to an industrial estate. These are largish plots of land. The people who live here are relatively affluent. But it's a very strange thing, because there's the natural tendency to have facades and windows that open onto the street. Everyone had them in the road around, but no one ever used the terraces, balconies. No one opened those windows because of the amount of pollution that came in from the other side of the road. So when we started this project, that was one thing that we realized, that our resident family, which was a family of 3 generations, was actually very well knit and valued its own privacy a lot. But they were kind of shackled by the fact that their house was located so close to an industrial estate. So we created a garden for them on the rooftop. And when we developed the form, we wondered what it would be like to imagine the built volume as being something solid that is actually cleaved apart or broken apart. And by fracturing the form is how we were able to get out little step-out balconies and little connectivities within the house. And eventually, as the program developed around the architecture, it wasn't very unsimilar to the traditional courtyard houses that one sees, in the manner in which the privacies were manipulated. So the other thing is that by putting the stone on the facade of the building rather than putting it on the floor, a lot of times people build homes as a reflection of their affluence. And especially when people are building their own home with their own hard work, money that they've got through their own hard work, it seems an imposition to define the aesthetic or their desires within the home, especially in terms of what material should be used. So with this client, he was very keen on using imported Italian marble, but we felt that perhaps what we could do was curtail the amount of marble that we used, and therefore we used it much more on the facade. And what it did was, because marble is a translucent stone, when light comes through marble, it has this very nice washed out sort of effect, and that's something that filled the light into the home and into various parts of the home. As our cities expand, it is inevitable that you will come up with situations of new neighbors. Very often when people build at the edge of cities, they feel a little afraid or paranoid about security, and they tend to kind of fortify themselves with layers and layers of security. And eventually, as the city gets filled out around them, the social connectivities change, but the layers of security remain. We were hired by an artist called Anita Dubey to build in a part of Delhi that is really its extreme outskirts, called Greater Noida. It's actually in the state of Uttar Pradesh. And this was an artist colony. So the government very often provides residential studio land to artists of repute in order to set up their studios. And this was a colony that was cut basically for them. It was called Kaladham. And as you can see, it's on the outskirts of the city, right next to the river Yamuna. And it's strange, when the city grows, you can see the hand of the urban planner, and how even an urban planner who appears very often to be mathematical and rational is prone to making stylistic flourishes as well. So this particular colony was cut by a certain creative planner, unknown, anonymous, who decided to cut the colony into octagons and then further cut the octagons into nice trapezoidal plots. Um, and because I guess this was an awkward size of a plot or shape of a plot, there were pre-sanctioned plans available for people to build. And that's what most of the neighbors, new neighbors, were building out. And by the time we had visited the site with our client, we realized that it was a little sort of repetitive, and there was a certain emphasis on horizontality. Windows seemed to be horizontal, balconies seemed to be horizontal. So in our conversation with our artist client, Anita, we asked her how she imagined herself working here. And she said, look, I feel art is not just the finished art object or the finished performance. Art is actually in the making of it. And it is in the making of the art that I want people to participate and to see me make the art. So we decided, or we imagined the studio to be this unfurling studio that kind of revealed itself to people who were around walking past. And the most private part of this studio residence was actually the residential part, which we put right on top of the studio. So there were two loops. There was a ceramic loop and there was a concrete loop. And we sort of built these out to have very, very high thermal mass in order to reduce the heat gain, because there were a lot of slits that were happening in the building. And what you see on the extreme right is actually an assembly of panels that we established, because one of the conversations we had with Anita was this idea of painting and how actually art today can exist as street art as much as it can exist as art in the museum. And so we imagined this armature of panels on which people could paint both inside her studio and turn it outwards as a sort of gift to the neighbors. And she could also organize mural painting on the outside of a building and flip it inside as an exhibit. So what we got were these slits in the spaces through which hot air would rise. The building doesn't have air conditioning. Even through summer, it stays relatively cool. It has an air cooling system, not an air conditioning system. And the idea was to create a sort of an interactive space that also allowed the artist to be able to share with her neighbors her process, who were also artists. And very often people imagine artists working in caves or in dark rooms all by themselves. But often artists do need to connect with the society that they're in, operating in or practicing in. And in this way, Anita gets to see the city as it develops around her. So this is a view of the panels. The entrance was also a question. Anita has a thing for movies. She's a film buff. And one of the things she wanted to do was to also have conversations around film. So the entrance was actually meant as another sort of space where people could sit and have conversations. In Delhi, and I believe anywhere actually, even in Pakistan, there is a tradition of sleeping on the barsati. And in fact, in that barsati life, there is a whole new network of social connections that happen at the upper floor of residences. So in Anita's house, it's possible to kind of relive that sort of vestige of how people used to live in Delhi, now on the outskirts of Delhi. And every Thursday evening, she has a film show where anyone walking by can stop by and watch art films. Now, in 2018, Anita was appointed as the curator for the Kochi Museris Biennale that gets held every 2 years in a town down south called Kochi in Kerala. And we were commissioned by her to design a pavilion for the Biennale, a pavilion that was actually meant to be a performative space, a space for cinema, lectures, and so on and so forth. But where it was located in the Biennale map was also inherently made it a hub, a central hub for activity. And again here, the conversation that we started off when we were designing her studio re-emerged. And the question was, how public is art, especially in the condition of a Biennale? And how important is it for a performance space to be a black box? So we went to site, which was an extremely verdant site, lots of trees. The natural canopy of the trees gave such amazing shade that we felt it was perhaps unnecessary to even build on this site. So we imagined a structure where steel and bamboo would marry and reflect the kind of ways in which the branches would cover the auditorium space. And what emerged was this half opaque, half transparent, half bamboo, half steel, half cement board, half acrylic sheet, completely dismantleable, completely removable from site. That was another conversation we had, that what if this pavilion could go away and people not know that it had been here? So everything, including the foundations of what we built, were removable and recyclable. We work with artists. We also work with small-time steel workers in order to realize the construction. And this happened in 3 months' time, just after the Kerala floods. So I really must commend not only my colleagues in studio, but also the people who worked on this project on site. So this is what it looks like. And we took care in designing the structure in a way that would allow us to allow the tree branches to cut through the roofing and allow people to almost have an arboreal walk, a walk amongst the tree branches. That's also the level where the sea breeze is accessible, so that balcony stays cool. So if you feel like it, you can be inside in air conditioning, or you could see a performance from outside. The idea was that those restrictions that come with a black box, turn your phone off, stay in the dark. For artists, it becomes, you don't see, you don't make eye contact with the people watching you. So this was our attempt to question that. I really like this photograph. It's of a b-boy cipher that happened there. And what's interesting is that the photographers captured this at the moment in which the dancer reflects the structure that we set up. Even the toilets here were dismantleable. Inward together. Often architecture is an outward expression. It's a public expression. It's a contribution we often find to the city, to the streets. So how do you work on a space that's meant for journeys inwards? So Ekanta is a sort of a wellness retreat in Haridwar on the banks of the Ganga. And it's actually a really old structure in a really old city. Often when one sits by a body of moving water, it has a spiritual sort of effect. And it is the beginning of a journey inwards. There is a relationship with being very, very still next to a body of moving water. And I think a lot of architecture and its relationships with water derives from this inherent sense we almost have as a species to large water bodies. The city of Haridwar has developed over many, many years. But in the 1920s, almost as a type of philanthropy, many rich Seths and businessmen created dharamshalas along the river. These are now completely abandoned. Our clients took over one such, and you can see that they were built in the 1920s because they reflect that sort of Art Deco style of building that was prevalent then. And when one looks in it, there are still vestiges of the older finishes, but it's also been upgraded with some stainless steel and vitrified tile. But you can see those curved corners, the sort of arrangement of the windows. The staircase was particularly reflective of Art Deco from the 20s. So we took that as a cue. And as we saw in the building, actually the most valuable space for this building was the side that faced the river. But somehow that was absolutely getting a lot of sun and not used at all. So we thought in our intervention here, we should try and do something that allows the view of the river to be thrown open to the visitor, cut them away from the busy street outside, and draw them to the calmness of the riverfront, and enhance the amount of programming that we did on those terraces. So this is what the riverside looks like and the street side looks like on the other side. So in that sliver of space of those terraces, we've created a pool, spaces for meditation, spaces for workshop, discussions. The rooms also open that way. This is a view from the restaurant. We decided to make the chairs higher so that you could get an unhindered view of the river. And that space outside till the ghats, we redeveloped them in order to allow people to make that the social hub of the retreat rather than the interior. It needed a redesign and addition of a couple of steps, and that's what it really looks like now. And that's how it's used. So the interiors took off from where that story of Art Deco was left, and it made it more contemporary. It uses more sustainable material, some recycled material. The weaves are also from craftsmen who are local in Uttar Pradesh. There are these isolation pods on the rooftop where you can just spend time by yourself. Um, the bathrooms were obviously dated earlier, so we kind of spruced them up a little bit. We kind of redid the staircase, restored it to its original colors and its original stone. This is the music room. Created these spaces where people could meet incidentally in the Dharamshala to be able to have conversations with each other. This is just outside the library. And this is targeting a much younger audience. It's looking at catering to people who have access to technology, who would like to understand wellness in a more sort of intensive, immersive way. So this entire space has now been technologized. You've got some smart technologies, some projections in order to be able to give better lectures. And Ekanta now has a full 360 of wellness associated with it. Water, as I said, is something that human beings respond to, but in our cities, water is unequal. So this is a project we did in 2012. It says ongoing, but now it's almost completed. This was a project to build community toilets in 2 cities, in Bhubaneswar and Cuttack in the state of Odisha. There were 12 typologies across 120 sites. It had to be a modular form of toilet. And we realized that actually the designing of a toilet is actually got to do with responding to what people, how they use toilets in different strata of society. We are so privileged that we assume that, bathrooms and toilets are almost second nature. But for many, many people in our country, it's a novelty. So it involved a lot of stakeholder discussions. We actually had a chart for a user experience. We called it defecation behavior. This was a program that was sponsored by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we developed these community-run, community-accessible toilets that catered to the way people would use these bathrooms, including encouraging hand washing, redesigning urinals that would actually encourage hand washing, making them sort of light-filled and airy, and actually create social spaces, because when you're using a community toilet, you're going to be using it with other people. And therefore, one has to respond to that social nature of that program. So out of 120, 97 have been built, and there are more on the way. Very often, buildings and institutions grow old, and people change, and technologies change. And the reasons why you build buildings in a way in which they are you build them to look in a certain way, is often defined by its time. But the institution very often goes further. So this is a school that we've renovated and added more programming to in Banaras, in Uttar Pradesh. So that's what it looked like before, and this is what it looks like today. It was part of a larger development, but I'll just run you through this. As you can see that the school's administrative part and classrooms were actually completely mixed originally. So we added a little bit more footprint, and we kind of developed a segregation in the program, and then we built out other blocks. But I really want to focus on this block, because where you guys are and where I am, we share a great history of brick masonry. And often that craft has now completely almost died out as a craft. It's now just a masonry infill in concrete structures. And very often this craft can be used very usefully in making more contemporary architecture that relies on more parametric ways of form finding. So that's what we did to enhance the protection that we gave to the building by using the thermal mass of the brick masonry wall, and actually craft these veils of brick masonry that part in order to allow light to come in but avoid the harshness of the sun, and create a more playful and less stern sort of appearance to a building that's actually directed at really young people, children. So I'll end with this project, building know-how. We've been taught that architecture is a highly specialized field. I believe that architecture, like cooking, originally, perhaps 200 years back, 300 years back, was a skill that everyone had, and we've forgotten that. So, in the era of MasterChef, where we're all realizing that we all have the ability to cook, this project is a experiment that is ongoing because it involves a lot of stakeholders in order to explore the idea of scaling architecture in a way in which local communities can build themselves. It's called Earthmade Gymnasium, but it's really speaking an akhada in a town, in a village called Malakpur, in a district called Baraut in Uttar Pradesh. And as you can see, our site was an abandoned, was a cleared sugarcane field. This area is in the Gangetic Plain. It's very fertile, normally used for sugarcane farming, and populated by predominantly the Jat community. The people here are extremely wedded to their soil in more ways than one. They're hardworking farmers, and they're also bodybuilders and pehelwans. And pehelwani, the relationship that is different between wrestling, the difference between wrestling and pehelwani is really the relationship with soil. What happens is almost every village produces cohorts of pehelwans who aspire to national and international fame. In the village, in the traditional akhada, they develop this very rustic way of wrestling, which involves almost ritualized preparation of soil on which to wrestle. But to wrestle internationally, you have to wrestle on mats, and the villages don't have mats. So in this project, we were actually working with the local member of parliament who was using his development funds that are assigned to every parliamentarian in order to build an akhada that the brief given to us was that build something that doesn't require maintenance, because if it becomes a white elephant, the honorable member of parliament would stand to get some bad press. So the idea was to build in a way in which it could actually be built and maintained by the pehelwans themselves. And the cue was really speaking their ritualized connection with soil. These young men and women aspire to greatness. We are particularly facing a little bit of a stress time with wrestlers at the moment for them, but they are really, enthusiastic, lovely people. Sports person in general are, because they're motivated in a way that none of us, because we chase money, they don't. But for every sports person that makes it, there are 999 that don't. And the infamy of returning home empty-handed often encourages them to stay on in the city. And the city of Delhi is witness to a whole underbelly of muscle on hire, who are basically unsuccessful wrestlers. So we were approached by the MP and his constituents, which included the local panchayat, who told us that they wanted some established institutional place where the kids of the village could actually wrestle on mats in the village. So, as they say, wo shahar jaake bigad jate hain. So they didn't want that to happen to their children. So they said, can we build something nearby? So the cue was the relationship the wrestlers have with their soil. And we created an akhada that had actually 3 types of rings. One was a traditional horde, which was the soil wrestling. There were 2 places for mat wrestling. One was a practice area and the other was a tournament area. We imagine the tournament area as becoming a social hub for the village, where other than kushti and kabaddi practice, it would also be the place where the panchayat sat. It would also be a place where regional dangals would happen. And the idea was to develop a vocabulary of rammed earth, interspaced with a bamboo structure and a steel structure like we'd experimented in Kochi, and also use bamboo reinforced concrete to create this structure. So this is currently now under stakeholder discussion. But yeah, so this is how we imagine the akhara to look like once it's developed. So I'll end, but just before I end, I just wanted to encapsulate the 3 main things that we feel are now more and more defining and driving our practice. One is, who do we build for? We've realized that we actually build for diversities. As architects, if we really want to be part of that urban story, the urban growth story, we really need to put ourselves out there, get out of the big cities, and work in places which give us more and more opportunities to work with more and more diverse programming and communities and clients. We need to build not just for the sculptural form of the building, but what it contributes to the city, to the neighborhood, to the streets, and to the future city that will inevitably come. In terms of resources, we should build to diffuse supplies. We call this the disaggregations of resilience. So these are these three things that we've realized. We have to imagine supplies as being not centralized forms, but networks of diffuse supply generations. Create anchors and reservoirs that get preserved intergenerationally, whether these are institutions of health, education, sanitation, or whether they are natural resources or assets or ecological assets. And in terms of what we want to build with, we want to build with an extreme sensitivity to material afterlives. It's not so much what is the newest material, but it's actually what happens to the material after its life. And is there possibilities of eking more and more life out of material is a certain goal that we have. And eventually build with people, not build as a specialized technological, making it so highly technological that it becomes inaccessible. The solution to the housing problem can never be top down, it'll have to be bottom up. So these are our sort of principles. So it's been 22 years and these are what we hope will guide us for the next 22. And along the way, we've also diversified within the studio. So other than Vaibhav and me, we're joined by Shruti and Khyati in the top management. And yeah, so that's us. And do follow us on Instagram, and I hope to come to Pakistan soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhav, for taking out the time to join us online, and deepest condolences on the passing of your grandmother.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I would now like to call all the speakers on stage for a Q&A session. Madhav, would you be able... Madhav, please stay on line for the Q&A session.
Sure.
Thank you.
You may want to reduce my screen size, though. Otherwise, I'll sort of loom over the co-panelists.
Hello. I just want to introduce Ruben, who's been working with me since 2010 and is an integral part of my journey, our designs, and our workshop. So this is Ruben, and we work together.
Thank you very much.
And this is Leena Hassan, and she's an interior designer, and she's partner at MSA, and happened to be my wife as well.
I just had a question for both the teams that are present here. Firstly, to Fawad and Lina, the first two projects that you showed had a very strong reference to Milan Kundera's The Curtain, which is something that you also referenced in your talk leading up to the 4 projects. So what I wanted to ask you was, The Curtain also has a lot of references in our local Sufi culture in terms of the hijab and the parda. So the question is there what is the connection between the curtain and the hijab and what it allows you to see on the inside, and what does it reveal and what does it conceal, both philosophically and also in terms of materiality? If I can just ask the other question to the other team, the sister team is, you referenced the localities in Karachi that have a very strong craft presence. And it was wonderful to hear the names of Golimar and Pan Mandi and Mazdoor Colony, and Haji Camp. So the question was, what is the connection between locality in terms of urbanity and what you guys practice in terms of furniture beyond craft? I just wanted to know, there was a strong reference to the urban locations that you guys source your craft out from. So I'm wondering if there is a philosophical connection between your furniture pieces in terms of how they represent Karachi beyond just the craft that is accessed from these areas. So, in terms of materiality, material product, and the urban localities that you referenced.
In my defense, I must say, the question is asked, the relation between the hijab and the curtain and our projects. I must say that there are no relations. There is no Sufism involved in all this. So, and that book by Milan Kundera about curtain is about the art of novel writing, or what is novel, what is the history of novel. So it is more like raising curtain from those, those specific or specificities that defines novel, and that helps you understand what that whole notion of novel is, that genre of novel is, and how it evolves, and what kind of influences it takes, and what kind of function it performs. So it's more like revealing the idea or that genre that exists, but probably we don't understand it fully, what it is all about. So while discussing that, he touches upon the idea of history making, how the history comes into being, especially in the art, in the realm of art. And that understanding gives you a clear idea, or kind of an idea, so how to go about making a history. So if you really want to be part of that history, what kind of practices you actually you guys need to indulge in? Because everyone wants to be part of somewhere, part of that history, the greater history, the larger history of their own discipline. So that's exactly what we actually learn in our institutes when we are doing specific projects there. The idea of learning projects in an institute is that you are making a difference in the discipline. You're trying to make a difference in the discipline, and trying to learn how to make a difference in the discipline. And how to make a difference in the discipline is how you think about that discipline. So institution can make you think about the discipline. They cannot give you or teach you how to practice the discipline. The practicing is a different ball game. You learn it when you come to the field. So it is the duty of the professionals working in the field that they teach the newcomers how to practice architecture, how to practice a discipline, but how to think a discipline, that's the responsibility of an institute. And I think the obvious reason is both the areas, the outside field and the institute, have different infrastructure. Like in field, you have real-time projects, you have real-time clients, You have real-time money involved. You have real-time draftsmen working around. You have real-time contractors. You have real-time sites. But in institutions, you don't have these infrastructures. In institutions, you have libraries. You have intellectuals. You have researchers. You have conceptual abstract ideas around you. So if their infrastructures are different, how can you assume that an institution is going to make an architect fully equipped to work in the field right away? No way. Never. They teach you to think like an architect. They teach you how to come up with an idea or how to develop ideas like an architect. That's it. That's the work of an institute. We should not demand more to the institute because this much the institution can do within those 5 years. So the rest is the work of a profession. They have to teach them. So coming back to your question, our project definitely does not have to do anything with the tasawwuf or mysticism. It's just exploration, and of course the construction of ideas that actually shape up in the form of an architectural object. Take up the shape through those materials that actually exhibits those qualities that idea demands.
From what I understand, what you're trying to ask me is that am I picking up things from these areas and just somehow, pasting them on to whatever pieces we design, or is there a slightly deeper sort of connection? I think that's what you're trying to ask. So, it works both ways. Sometimes it's the craft that kind of leads to the design. Sometimes it's the design that leads us to the craft. Sometimes it's the need of the material that we want to use which leads us to a certain craftsman. So it works like that. But when you're designing things on the sort of scale that we, it's a business that we're running. So a lot of the craft that craftsmen that I had met initially were not consistent. So हमारे साथ काम करने के बाद एक consistency आई, हमने उनके material को बेहतर करने का मिलके तरीका सोचा. And so it's like a process which is two ways. So like with the diya, which is a really simple small example, but वो दिए अब नहीं बन रहे थे copper में. So because of what we're doing, अब उसके फिर से वो वाले molds भी बन रहे हैं, फिर से बन रहे हैं. इसी तरह there's a lot of jewelry makers that we work with. तो उनके जो punches थे जो उन्होंने discard कर दिए थे, we use now those punches on brass and somehow lay them. So we've kind of found a new context for something that was being abandoned, or for that matter even block print. There's a lot of block printers who are not doing block print any longer, who are working now on screen printing. So there's these gorgeous blocks that you find all over Karachi, जो के साइडों से थोड़े से टूटे हुए हैं और किसी को नहीं पता उनके साथ करना क्या है. So we somehow, what we do is it's more the sort of feeling that can evoke, and we sometimes will use that as a handle or find some sort of a new context for that craft. So it's a mutual sort of thing that we have with many craftsmen. That answers your question.
This is a question for Madhav Raman. Madhav, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes. Hi.
Okay, Raman, I'm an architect. My name is Kabir Malik, and it was really very inspirational to see your work and the way you've gone through the entire process, especially dealing with the clients. My question is not a question, I just want to have a feedback from you, three points. One is, what is the personal inspiration of Raman Sahab to take the process of designing. I can understand from the smile, number one. The number two is that how much sustainability material do you feel that is the future for such material to be used in your projects? And the last point is that how are you engaging the local craftsmen? You see, there is a lot of things are being deprived, especially in Pakistan. There are very few architects who are still, bringing the old craftsmen back into the industry, like brickwork or nakashi work or fresco or wood. So, what sort of things are happening in your part of the world? So, this is just 3 points. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'll try and be as precise as you were with the questions in my answer. Firstly, my process, देखिए बाल बिखरे हुए हैं, so you can imagine how organized I am in terms of process. But honestly, the great thing about
I'm sorry, मैं सवाल उर्दू में हिंदी में कर लेता, आप तो अच्छी खासी उर्दू हिंदी बोलते हो यार. तो अगर आपके बाहर दिख रहे हैं तो you can go उर्दू.
आप भी जानते हैं ज़बान मेरी यहाँ की दिल्ली है, तो अब उर्दू बरकरार नहीं है, उसको अब आप उर्दू फॉर्म ऑफ हिंदुस्तानी कह सकते हैं at the best. But I mean, it's how we speak here. So the great thing is I was lucky enough to find my partner in college. It's helped us grow with the practice. He and I are absolute polar opposites in the way we approach design. I'm much more, how do I say, driven by facts, figures, research. I have a sort of, I'm a unqualified economist because I really wanted to study economics, but ended up doing architecture instead. He's much more intuitive. So my process basically involves having arguments with my partner and usually land on our feet at the end of that. Your second question was to do with what I think about sustainable materials. I feel that the sort of circular or sort of vicious cycle that we're struggling to get out of as architects in terms of the materials we use is that we're kind of hardwired educationally and in terms of how we structure our practices, where we locate ourselves, who we work with, to a sort of industrial process. The problem with that process is there is no real recycle. Nobody leases out a tile, for example, or nobody leases out windows or doors. You are sold, and once it's sold, there is no way of leasing it back. It's very interesting, luxury cars are leased out very regularly, but somehow the components of buildings are not. I feel that the future of technology is in being able to close that industrial loop. However, that technology will always be very, very expensive. And in countries like mine, and as is true for you also, that the cost of technology is what is really the burden. And therefore, as designers, we have to reimagine our notion of technology. It's not really cutting-edge technology, but rather more accessible technologies that we need to engage with. So in terms of sustainable materials, interestingly, the cutting-edge technology is now going back to a material that is perhaps the most ancient material for building, which is essentially ceramics. So 3D printing ink is relying on technology that's using the same kind of material. So I feel that in South Asia we are poised at a certain place where crafts use material like wood, ceramics, in ways that will continue to be effectively cheaper than the robotic avatar of the fabrication. And therefore, as designers here, I feel if we are to build outside big cities, we have to think of more and more interesting ways of assembling material that rely on the skills that are available locally as craft. And your third was, sorry, you gotta remind me of the third question.
Hello. Yeah. Around the third part was the involvement of the local craftsmen. How much are you getting those people involved, to do something?
Yeah, so I feel we are at this cusp of erosion of craft. It's not disappeared. We need to think of ways and design buildings and assemble buildings in ways in which that craft becomes a viable and look, everyone who works, especially people who work with their hands, require to feel proud of their work. If their brief is just to fill in the blanks left behind by a machine, it's a dead-end job. It's not something that will propagate and enrich itself. So as designers, we must create ways in which the craft process perhaps is not frozen in time, but is allowed to grow and propagate using new technological tools. So imagine a future, maybe 20 years down the line, where a 3D printer is available har gali ke kone mein. Like how desktop, how publishing went on to desktop publishing. Now, if we can imagine designing masonry units that are more complicated, that are 3D printed, but can be used to be assembled by a well-trained or like jisne shagirdi ki hai, a mason who has access to a sort of a more intergenerational knowledge system of the craft, we feel that is much more sustainable than trying to use cutting-edge technology materials. So I hope that answers.
Thank you.
Question.
फवाद साहब एक छोटा सा इजाज़त सर आप बेसिकली तो एक लिंकेज है बिटवीन एकेडमिया आप पढ़ाती भी रहे हैं और आप प्रैक्टिस भी कर रहे हैं फिर आपका लगाव भी है तारीख के साथ आज अब अच्छा आपका एक इक़्तिबास सुनने को मिला वेरी नाइस सर ये थोड़ा सा गाइड करें क्योंकि आप दोनों प्रोफेशंस को बड़ा एकेडमिया भी है और प्रैक्टिस भी है सर आने वाली जनरेशन को आप क्या समझते हैं कि हमारे जो स्कूल्स हैं वो कहाँ लैब्स कर रहे हैं उसको उन चैलेंजेस के लिए तैयार करने के लिए क्योंकि देखें ये हमारी जिम्मेदारी है कि आज हम जो प्रैक्टिस में या एकेडमिया में हैं वी हैव टू ब्रिंग टू द नोटिस ऑफ एवरीवन कि यार कहाँ इन बच्चों को बेहतर कर सकते हैं क्योंकि पिंटरेस्ट गूगल ये ज़्यादा आर्किटेक्चर हम कमी कर रहे हैं ज़्यादा कर रहे होते हैं हमारा क्लाइंट तो लगा के 6 फोटो हमारे सामने रख देता है दरवाजा ऐसा बना दें खिड़की ऐसे कर दें तो वो एनवेलप बनाना पड़ता है बेसिकली लेकिन जो आने वाली जनरेशन है उसके लिए चैलेंजेस तो लगातार हैं एंड देन एक सवाल का दूसरा पहलू कि जो मुझे फील होता है आफ्टर इवन 30 इयर्स ऑफ प्रैक्टिस कि टेक्नोलॉजिकल एडवांसमेंट को जब तक इंट्रोड्यूस नहीं किया जाएगा तो वो जो हम ब्रिक से बाहर नहीं निकलेंगे ना स्टील स्ट्रक्चर्स पे नहीं आएंगे स्पेस फ्रेमिंग पे नहीं आएंगे तो उसको कैसे तो थोड़ा सा बस इस पर अगर आप छोटा सा मेरा ब्रीफ कर दें तो थोड़ा सा आसानी हो जाए
I think it's too early for me to tell the new generation कि अभी वो उम्र शायद नहीं आई लेकिन चलें जहाँ तक जितना तजर्बा है जहाँ तक मैंने दोनों साइड्स को एक्सप्लोर किया है तो I can keep my experience. One thing is that probably we have start demanding too much from an institute. So we need to understand that जैसे मैंने थोड़ी देर पहले भी कहा कि इंस्टीट्यूट चीज़ें कर सकते हैं कुछ नहीं कर सकते बिकॉज ऑफ देयर इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर कुछ चीज़ें प्रैक्टिस नहीं करनी है एंड प्रॉब्ली that whole thing needs to be regulated by of course PCAT-P because they are the one who need to first understand it and then propagate it कि what are the roles of the practice and the institute to make an architect. दुनिया में कोई आर्किटेक्ट लाइसेंस तब तक नहीं लेता जब तक वो प्रोफेशनल पेपर्स नहीं देता आपने बिकॉज दे हैव बीन जज्ड अगेन नॉट ऑन द बेसिस कि वो इंस्टीट्यूट में क्या पढ़ के हैं नो व्हाट दे हैव डन इन द फील्ड बाय द PCAT or any licensing body. It means there are two parts, clearly two parts of an education. One is how to do practice in a professional environment in a real time situation, and secondly how to be part of a tradition, an educational tradition, or a tradition of making history, or tradition of thought. वो आप लिंक करते हैं इंस्टीट्यूशन के साथ क्योंकि आप आर्किटेक्चर किसी मेमार के साथ भी सीख सकते हैं कॉन्ट्रैक्टर से भी सीख सकते हैं. Going to an institution means something. It means you are now associating yourself with a tradition of institutions. अब institutions बनते किस तरह से हैं उनकी tradition क्या है? Of course उनकी tradition जो है वो लिखने, पढ़ने और ख्याल से जुड़ी है, ideas की generation से जुड़ी है. तो ideas की generation और ideas और सोचने का तरीका बताना ये institution की responsibility है. जब आप इंस्टीट्यूशन से कुछ और डिमांड करना शुरू करते हैं तो इंस्टीट्यूशन अपना फोकस उस तरफ या अपनी एनर्जी उस तरफ भी लगाना शुरू कर देते हैं कि जी इनको BOQ की समझ हो, इनको साइट्स की समझ हो, तो वी आर ट्राइंग टू मेक देम और द इंस्टीट्यूशन आर ट्राइंग टू टीच देम व्हाट दे आर नॉट एक्चुअली इक्विप्ड विद। तो होता क्या है कि वो जो अपने उनके कहना चाहिए उनके अपने जो स्ट्रॉन्ग पॉइंट्स हैं या इंस्टीट्यूशन के जो अपने स्ट्रॉन्ग होल्ड्स हैं वो उनको भी छोड़ देते हैं। तो ना स्टूडेंट वो सीख पाता है कि सोचना किस तरह से है और ना वो सीख पाता है प्रैक्टिस किस तरह से करनी है। तो प्रॉब्ली द ओनली थिंग वी नीड टू डू इज वी नीड टू क्लियरली डिफाइन कि व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ एन इंस्टीट्यूट। उसने एक आर्किटेक्ट को आर्किटेक्ट बनाने के लिए कहाँ तक सिखाना है, वो सब कुछ नहीं सिखा सकता क्योंकि उसकी अपनी रिस्ट्रिक्शंस हैं। सो इंस्टीट्यूशन को वही सिखाना चाहिए। इसी वजह से आप इंस्टीट्यूशंस में ऐसे बहुत सारे लोगों को देखेंगे जो शायद इंस्टीट्यूशन में नहीं होने चाहिए, क्योंकि वो इंस्टीट्यूशन वो सिखाने की कोशिश कर रहा है जो नहीं सिखा सकता, और उन लोगों को रखने की कोशिश करता है जो असल में इंस्टीट्यूशन में नहीं होने चाहिए, वो शायद कहीं और बहुत अच्छा परफॉर्म कर सकते हैं। अब उस कन्फ्यूजन की वजह से इंस्टीट्यूशंस आर लूजिंग देयर ओन फोर्टे जो हमेशा से रहा है कि उन्होंने नए ख्यालात कैसे पैदा करने हैं, नया सोचने का तरीका कैसे देना है, उन्होंने कैसे बताना है कि आर्किटेक्चरली एज एन आर्किटेक्ट एक आर्किटेक्चरल थॉट होती क्या है, एक आर्किटेक्ट को सोचना किस तरह से चाहिए, और प्रैक्टिस में ऑफ कोर्स उनको ये बताना है कि उस सोच को आपने प्रैक्टिस में कैसे लेके आना है, उसके अंदर कौन सी चीज़ें हैं जहाँ पे आपको कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ करने हैं और फिर कॉम्प्रोमाइज़ करने के तरीके कैसे हैं, ये सारी चीज़ें आपको इंस्टीट्यूशन से। तो जब तक ये रोल बड़े क्लियर नहीं होंगे तब तक प्रॉब्ली हम स्टूडेंट्स को और न्यू आर्किटेक्ट्स की ट्रेनिंग भी नहीं कर पाते क्योंकि वो दोनों कंफ्यूज हैं।
Raman, this is Arif Changi. I'm an architect. My question is not rather a question, it's a comment. We have seen some wonderful projects of yours that you have done for, especially for different communities and all that. And one thing was very obvious in your design was this sustainability in your design, and especially while working on the projects like the one that you just showed us. Another aspect of your design is perhaps that I've witnessed is the resiliency in design. We have seen a lot of natural disasters and all these things, especially in our part of the world. So I see resiliency against harsh weather, resiliency against natural disasters and all these things. My question to you is, so how do you ensure this resiliency while working in the rural setup? So how do you make their houses resilient against all these, against the harsh weather and also against these natural disasters and all that? So that's my small question.
Thank you for that. I think you touched upon a thing that we've taken our journey so far to realize, is that actually, I honestly feel in the past 100 years, we've started living on this planet like we don't belong here. Like it is something that is separate from us. I mentioned this when I spoke. I feel ultimately, I know it sounds bizarre, possibly very radical, perhaps too radical for an architectural conference. But there's this thought in the back of my head that we used to know how to build our own homes. It's not, 5 generations back, 6 generations back. It's not unheard of. It's rapidly eroding as our imagination of what a city is becomes more and more Occidental or Western, and as we adopt those forms of densification of how we live, or where we live, there will be no other way of building. So when you talk about resilience, it's multifold. It's not just the ability to bounce back from a natural disaster. The ability to bounce back from a natural disaster often is inherent in most knowledge systems in communities that already exist in fragile ecosystems. They've addressed that by building very deep connections with the land, the soil, the other inhabitants of that ecosystem. I think it's, for me as an architect, looking forward to the next 20 years of possibly more and more catastrophic climatic events, feeling frustrated in the fact that one drop in an ocean of effort can never possibly be enough. I think for me, in terms of medium to long term, for my practice, for our practice here, the idea is to diversify our own streams of ideas or streams of consciousness. So to get more and more different types of people to work with us, to collaborate with us, to create architecture as a conscious moment, to be very, very aware and conscious of what one is doing. I strongly feel you can't build a building without killing a little bit of the planet. So now the thing is that if that is how we have to proceed, then every kill has to count. It has to have meaning, it has to have significance, it has to have the ability to sustain in terms of its lifetime. It has to become a repository of memories and therefore become precious to communities who are then incentivized to keep it going, rather than always hunting for the newest or the latest or the most exotic. One of you, I think the previous question mentioned that, is that we are bombarded by imagery from all over the world because of the internet. I think that's an advantage. I think that's an advantage that can be put to good use by us if we put on our design thinking skills. That we don't necessarily need to fight these vestiges of globalization, we just need to reimagine them. So that's what I think resilience will come from us being able to really enrich and propagate as many diverse knowledge systems rather than just looking for the latest cutting edge technology.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Ahmed Chaudhry. My question is to Zara Ibrahim about, she started as an architect for a while and then started a small business and continued to grow into a flourishing brand now, mashallah. So how was that journey for you, especially, I would very much be interested in knowing how through that journey of growing as a brand or as a business, you were able to maintain the homely and intimate and nature of your items and objects while growing as a business.
Thank you. Actually, first, Madhav, everything that you've spoken about, you've been so inspirational. Your talk was amazing. The way you've been answering questions was really, really amazing. And in a way, I guess what Madhav was talking about on a much larger scale, I guess I'm doing it, I'm trying to do it on a very small scale. It's just that, what I'm thinking about is what is local, what is it that belongs to my people, and usi se bahut choti si practices shuru hoke, as my love for the craft and the craftsmen that I worked with kept growing. I knew that I could give them technology, and I could give them, I could help give them a face, and they do the same for us. In 2010, when Ruben came on board, uske baad se, with every new large project that would come along, I would think, how are we going to ever do this? Jab airport ka project aaya, mere paas shayad us zamane mein we were 30 people, we didn't have enough lakdi. But I think each one, my entire team, every new project was a challenge. We grew. And I think it was the fact that I wasn't thinking about being a really large business or a really large name. I was really only thinking about jo kaam aata tha, I had to do it properly and well. So with each project, we just kept growing. And now the team is so large that we feel that we need those projects to sustain us. So I guess it's, that's how the growth happened.
Thank you, speakers.
If I may just say, before we end,
Sorry, I think someone has a question. Madhav, you were saying something. I'm so sorry I cut you off.
Yeah. Sorry.
Speakers,
No, I
please
think
stay
I
on
don't want to
stage.
hold you guys back. I guess it's been a long day. I just wanted to say about Fawad and Zara, I think, you see, the thing is that both of your works are also kind of the things that we aspire to do. And it's because in your work, Zara, the sensitivity to craft, basically tapping into those ancient traditions, right? And Fawad, in your work, is that sort of contemporary expression of materials that are essentially very, very robust and very, very humble. Those are, and the idea that material should show age. I think that's what I really took away. So thank you all. I mean, it's been most informative, and I'm super. I mean, even on online format, I'm so excited to be there in some way or the other. So inshallah, I'll hopefully come there soon in physical form.
We look forward to that as well.
Thank you so much.
Speakers, please come onto the stage for a group photograph with Chairman IAPEX, Convener IAPEX 2023 and Convener Conference. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, brings us to the end of the conference session B. Please join us for tea in the food area.
Recording stopped.
Everyone, please join us in the food area for some tea.